The day my daughter told me I was nothing but a burden who should disappear quietly, I smiled and nodded like I'd done for 46 years. But this time, something inside me cracked open, and what came out wasn't the obedient mother she expected. My name is Catherine Morrison, and this is the story of how I went from a discarded widow to the woman who held every card in a game I didn't even know I was playing. 3 months ago, I thought my life was over. My husband, Thomas, had just died at 73 from a sudden stroke, and I was drowning in grief so thick I could barely breathe. We'd been married for 46 years, and suddenly half of me was just gone. I wandered through our house in Riverside like a ghost, touching his things, smelling his cologne on the shirt still hanging in the closet, unable to accept that he was never coming home. That's when my daughter Natalie swooped in. She arrived with her husband Brandon and their 2 perfectly groomed children, all sympathy and soft voices. "Mom, you look so tired," she'd said, squeezing my hand with what I thought was genuine concern. "This house is too much for you now. All these stairs, the yard work, the memories everywhere. It must be torture." I should have heard the calculation in her voice. I should have seen the way her eyes flickered over the antique furniture, the artwork Thomas had collected, the expensive renovations we'd done just 2 years ago. But I was grieving, vulnerable, and desperately grateful that my daughter seemed to care. If you feel my words, show your support by liking the video and subscribing to the channel, and tell me from which city you belong, so I can see how far a woman's impactful voice can reach. Help me build this community so we can bring more truthful stories for you. Natalie started visiting every day after the funeral. She'd bring takeout I couldn't eat and sit with me while I cried. But slowly, subtly, the conversations shifted. "Mom, have you thought about what you're going to do?" she'd ask. "This house is worth at least $2 million now. The property taxes alone must be crushing you. And with Dad gone, how will you manage the finances?" The truth was, I had no idea about our finances. Thomas had handled everything for our entire marriage. I knew we were comfortable, that he'd been successful with his architectural firm, but the details had always been his domain. I was the wife who managed the home, raised Natalie, hosted dinner parties, and volunteered at the community center. Money talk happened behind the closed door of Thomas's study, and I'd never thought to ask for entry. Brandon started joining these conversations. He was a real estate developer, smooth and confident, always dressed in expensive suits that screamed success. "Catherine," he'd say in that patronizing tone men use when they think they're being helpful, "I've been looking into your situation. Thomas left things in a complicated state. There are tax implications you probably don't understand. The best thing would be to simplify everything, make it manageable for you." They brought brochures for senior living communities, glossy pages showing smiling elderly people, playing cards, and doing watercolor paintings. "Look how happy they are, Mom," Natalie would say. "No responsibilities, no worries, just living your best life with people your own age. Isn't that what you deserve, after taking care of everyone else for so long?" What I deserved, apparently, was to be shuffled off to a glorified waiting room for death, while my daughter claimed everything Thomas and I had built together. The final confrontation happened on a Tuesday morning, exactly 8 weeks after Thomas's funeral. I was still sleeping in the guest room because I couldn't face our bedroom without him. I'd wake up reaching for him and finding empty space, and the pain would hit me fresh every single morning. Natalie arrived early, before 9, with Brandon and a man I'd never seen before. "This is Richard Thornton, our attorney," she announced, not asking if they could come in, just walking past me into my own living room.
"Mom, we need to have a serious conversation about your future."
I followed them, confused and still in my bathrobe, feeling ambushed in my own home. "What's going on, Natalie?" She exchanged a look with Brandon, one of those married couple looks that communicates volumes without words. "Mom, there's no easy way to say this. According to Dad's will, I'm the primary beneficiary of the estate. The house, the business assets, the investment accounts, all of it comes to me." The words didn't make sense. I stared at her, then at Brandon, then at the lawyer who wouldn't meet my eyes. That can't be right. Thomas would never leave me with nothing. Natalie's expression shifted, and for just a moment I saw something cold and triumphant flash across her face. Dad knew I'd be better equipped to manage his legacy.
He set up a small trust for your living expenses, enough for a modest apartment and basic needs.
But the bulk of the estate is mine. My legs went weak. I sat down heavily on the couch. The same couch where Thomas and I had watched movies together, where we'd held Natalie as a baby, where we'd celebrated holidays and anniversaries. "How much?" I whispered. "How much is this trust?" $3,000 a month, Richard Thornton said quietly. "It's enough for a comfortable retirement, Mrs. Morrison." $3,000. Thomas's business alone was worth over $20 million. Our investment portfolio was extensive. This house had been appraised at $2.3 million just last year. And my daughter was telling me I'd get $3,000 a month while she took everything else. Natalie stood up, smoothing her designer dress. "I know this is hard to hear, Mom, but Dad made his wishes clear. He trusted me to handle things properly. And honestly, you've never been good with money or business decisions. This is what's best for everyone." "What's best for everyone?" I repeated, my voice sounding strange to my own ears. "Or what's best for you?" Her mask slipped completely then. "Don't be dramatic, Mother. You'll be fine. Brandon and I have already found you a lovely apartment in the Meadowbrook Senior Complex. 1 bedroom, very clean, perfect for your needs. We've even paid the first month's rent and deposit." I looked at Brandon, who had the decency to look somewhat uncomfortable. "You've already rented me an apartment? Without asking me?" "We're helping you transition, Catherine," he said, "making it easier for you. We can move you in this weekend. The complex has activities, a dining room, everything you could need. This weekend." They were giving me 4 days to pack up 46 years of my life and move into a 1-bedroom apartment while they claimed my house, my husband's legacy, everything we'd built together. "I need to see the will," I said. "I need to speak with Thomas's lawyer." Natalie's expression hardened. "I have the will right here, Mom. Richard has verified everything. There's nothing to contest. Dad's wishes were crystal clear." She pulled out a document, and I recognized Thomas's signature at the bottom. But something felt wrong. Thomas had always been so careful, so protective of me. Why would he leave me essentially penniless? "The truth is, Mom," Natalie continued, her voice taking on a cruel edge I'd never heard before, "Dad knew exactly who you were.
A housewife who never finished college, who never had a career, who never contributed anything significant beyond cooking and cleaning. He knew I was the one who inherited his intelligence, his business sense, his drive. You were just the woman who kept the house running while he built an empire. Just the woman who kept the house running. 46 years of marriage, reduced to the role of a glorified maid." I looked at my daughter, really looked at her, and saw a stranger. When had she become this person? Or had she always been this way, and I'd been too blind to see it? "You have until Saturday to pack your personal belongings," Natalie said. "1 suitcase, maybe 2. The furniture stays, obviously. It's part of the house. Oh, and Mom," she paused at the door, her smile sharp enough to cut. "Find somewhere quiet to live out your remaining years. Nobody wants to hear an old woman complain about how unfair life is." After they left, I sat in that living room for 6 hours straight. I didn't cry. I didn't call anyone. I just sat there, feeling something fundamental shift inside me. The obedient mother, the dutiful wife, the woman who always put everyone else first, she was dissolving like sugar in water. And what remained was someone harder, someone who'd been buried under decades of pleasing others. I had 4 days. 4 days to figure out if my daughter was telling the truth, or if she'd just committed the biggest mistake of her life. The next morning, I did something I should have done years ago. I went through Thomas's study, really went through it, every file, every drawer, every locked cabinet. Thomas had been obsessively organized, everything labeled and dated. And what I found made my blood run cold. There were 2 wills. The first one, dated 5 years ago, left everything to Natalie except for a small provision for me. But there was a second one, dated just 8 months before Thomas died, and this one told a completely different story. I sat at Thomas's desk, holding both documents, and slowly began to understand the game my daughter had been playing. The newer will was detailed and specific. It left me the house, 75% of all assets, including the business and investments, approximately $28 million,
Natalie was to receive $5 million, held in a trust that wouldn't fully vest until her 50th birthday. And there was a clause, a very specific clause, about what would happen if she treated me poorly after Thomas's death. Tucked behind the will was a sealed envelope with my name on it, in Thomas's handwriting. My hands shook as I opened it. My dearest Catherine, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and I suspect Natalie has shown you the old will. I'm sorry, my love. I should have told you about this while I was alive, but I kept hoping I was wrong about our daughter. 6 months ago, I overheard a conversation between Natalie and Brandon. They were in my study, going through my files, calculating their inheritance. Catherine's going to be so easy to manage, Natalie said. She's never questioned anything in her life. We show her a will, any will, and she'll believe it. Mom's too stupid to know the difference. Catherine, hearing our daughter say those words broke something in me. I realized I'd failed both of you. I'd failed you by not encouraging your independence, by keeping you sheltered from financial matters, and I'd failed Natalie by never teaching her the value of integrity and compassion. So I changed everything. The new will protects you, but more than that, I've left you information that will show you exactly who you married. I wasn't perfect, Catherine. I made mistakes, kept secrets, built my business in ways I'm not proud of, but everything I did to provide for our family. In the safe behind the painting of Riverside Bridge, you'll find documents that explain everything. The combination is our wedding date. I love you. I have always loved you, and I'm sorry I won't be there to see you become the strong, independent woman I always knew you could be. Thomas. I stared at the letter, tears finally coming. Then I walked to the painting he'd mentioned, removed it from the wall, and opened the safe. Inside were financial records, business documents, and a leather journal filled with Thomas's neat handwriting. I spent the entire day reading, and with each page, my understanding of my life shifted. Thomas hadn't been a simple architect. He'd been a consultant for some of the wealthiest families in the state, helping them hide assets, avoid taxes, and move money through complex offshore accounts. It wasn't quite illegal, but it lived in a gray area that made my stomach turn. He'd made millions helping rich people get richer, while paying less to society. But 6 years ago, something had changed. Thomas had started working with federal investigators, providing information about his clients' illegal activities. He'd become what they called a confidential informant, helping build cases against money launderers and tax evaders. In exchange, his own questionable activities had been forgiven, and he'd been allowed to keep the money he'd earned. The journal detailed everything: names, dates, account numbers, deals he'd facilitated and then exposed. My husband had spent the last 6 years of his life trying to make amends for the first decades of his career, and he died before the final cases could close. There was a business card clipped to the last page of the journal: Special Agent Diana Foster, Financial Crimes Division, FBI. On the back, Thomas had written, "If anything happens to me, call Diana. She'll explain everything and protect Catherine." I sat there as the sun set, holding my dead husband's secrets in my lap. Natalie didn't just want to steal my inheritance. She wanted to claim money that Thomas had earned through questionable means and then tried to redeem. Money that might not be entirely clean, depending on how you looked at it. But I had the real will. I had Thomas's journal, and I had a direct line to the FBI agent who'd been working with him. For the first time since Thomas died, I felt something other than grief. I felt angry. I felt determined. And I felt ready to show my daughter exactly what happens when you underestimate a woman who has nothing left to lose. That night, I made 3 phone calls. The first was to the lawyer whose name was on the real will, a man named James Hartwell, who'd been Thomas's attorney for over 20 years. "Mrs. Morrison," he said when he heard my voice, "I've been trying to reach you for weeks. Natalie told me you were traveling in Europe, dealing with your grief. I haven't left Riverside, Mr. Hartwell, and I need to see you first thing tomorrow morning." The second call was to Special Agent Diana Foster. She answered on the first ring. "Mrs. Morrison, I was wondering when you'd find Thomas's journal. You knew about me?"
Thomas talked about you constantly. He was trying to protect you from all of this. But now that he's gone, you need protection from your own daughter. Can you help me?" There was a pause.
Mrs. Morrison, what I'm about to tell you is confidential. Your husband's information helped us build cases against 17 different individuals for money laundering and tax evasion. Those cases are closing next week. Once they do, all of Thomas's cooperation becomes public record. If Natalie has claimed your inheritance using a false will, she's about to discover that the money she's stealing is evidence in multiple federal investigations. What does that mean for me? It means you're about to become very important to the federal government. And it means your daughter just committed fraud against a federal witness. That's a serious crime, Mrs. Morrison. The third call was the hardest. I dialed Natalie's number and waited for her to answer. Mom? She sounded surprised. Is everything okay? Are you packing? Natalie, I need you to come to the house tomorrow at 10 in the morning. There's something we need to discuss about your father's will. Mom, we already discussed this. The will is clear. No, sweetheart. Your father's will is very clear. The question is which will you're going to believe is real. I hung up before she could respond. That night, I slept in my bedroom for the first time since Thomas died. I lay on his side of the bed holding his pillow and whispered my thanks to a man who'd loved me enough to protect me, even after death. Tomorrow, Natalie was going to learn that her mother wasn't as stupid as she'd always believed, and the lesson was going to cost her everything. The next morning, I woke up at dawn and did something I hadn't done in months. I got dressed properly, put on makeup, and styled my hair. I wore the navy blue suit Thomas had always said made me look powerful. When I looked in the mirror, I barely recognized the woman staring back at me. She looked like someone who knew her worth. James Hartwell arrived at 9:30 carrying a briefcase that I knew contained the documents that would change everything. He was a distinguished man in his late 60s, with silver hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. "Catherine," he said warmly, embracing me, "I'm so sorry about Thomas, and I'm sorry about what Natalie has put you through." You knew what she was doing? Thomas suspected she might try something like this. That's why he had me draw up the second will with such specific protections. He loved Natalie, but he wasn't blind to her flaws. We sat in Thomas's study, and James laid out the documents on the desk. This is the real will, witnessed and notarized 8 months ago. It supersedes any previous documents. Natalie either doesn't know about it or she's hoping you don't know about it. What happens when she gets here? We present her with the facts. We give her a chance to admit what she's done, and then we decide how to proceed based on her response. At exactly 10 o'clock, Natalie arrived with Brandon and Richard Thornton. She walked into the study like she owned it already, her confidence radiating. But when she saw James Hartwell sitting at Thomas's desk, her expression flickered with something I'd learned to recognize as fear. "Mr. Hartwell, what are you doing here?" Natalie asked, her voice too bright. "I'm here representing your mother, Natalie, and I'm here to discuss your father's actual last will and testament." Richard Thornton shifted uncomfortably. "I was told there was only one will." James opened his briefcase and produced the document I'd found in Thomas's study. "Then you were told incorrectly. This will, dated 8 months before Thomas's death, is his final testament. It was properly witnessed by 2 attorneys from my firm and notarized by a licensed notary public. It supersedes any previous wills, including the one you showed Mrs. Morrison." Natalie's face went pale, but she recovered quickly. "That's impossible. Dad never mentioned a second will." "Your father mentioned many things you chose not to hear, like how disappointed he was in the way you talked about me." The room went very still. Brandon spoke up, his voice tense. "What exactly does this will say?" James handed him a copy. "It says that Catherine inherits the house, 75% of all assets, and control of Thomas's business interests. You and Natalie inherit $5 million, held in a trust with specific vesting requirements." $5 million? Natalie's voice was shrill. "That's insane. Dad would never do that to me." "Actually, he did," James said calmly. "And there's more. There's a clause stating that if you, Natalie, treat your mother with disrespect or cruelty following Thomas's death, your entire inheritance reverts to Catherine." Natalie stood up abruptly. "This is fake. You forged this document." "The document has been on file with my firm for 8 months," witnessed by multiple parties. The one you showed your mother, however, is 5 years old and had been replaced. The question is, did you know that? Richard Thornton was reading the document, his expression growing more alarmed. Natalie, where did you get the will you showed me? From Dad's files, she said quickly. It was in his study, in the file cabinet. That was the old will Thomas kept for reference, James said. This is the current one. And by presenting the old will as current, you've committed fraud. Natalie turned to me, her eyes blazing. Mom, you can't believe this. Someone is manipulating you. You're grieving. You're confused. This man is taking advantage of you. I stood up slowly, drawing myself to my full height. Natalie, I found your father's letter. I found his journal. I know exactly what you did and exactly what you said about me. Her face changed. The mask of concerned daughter disappeared completely, replaced by cold calculation. What journal? The one where he wrote about overhearing you and Brandon in his study 6 months ago. The one where he quoted you, calling me too stupid to know the difference between a real will and a fake one. Brandon's face went white. Oh, God. Natalie, James said, his voice hard now. You have 2 choices. You can admit what you've done, return any assets you've already accessed, and face the consequences. Or you can continue denying it, and I'll file criminal charges for fraud, forgery, and elder abuse. Elder abuse, Natalie spat. Don't be ridiculous. You threw your mother out of her own house, gave her $200, and told her to find a cheap apartment while you claimed a $30 million estate that wasn't yours. That's textbook elder financial abuse. Natalie's expression turned desperate. Mom, please. Think about the grandchildren. Think about our family. Do you really want to destroy everything over money? This isn't about money, I said quietly. This is about you looking at your grieving mother and seeing an opportunity to rob her. This is about you calling me stupid, useless, and irrelevant. This is about you showing me exactly what you think I'm worth. She stared at me, and I watched her realize that I wasn't the weak, compliant mother she'd always known. Brandon cleared his throat. Catherine, what if we make this right? We return everything, apologize, and move forward as a family. If you feel my words, show your support by liking the video and subscribing to the channel. And tell me from which city you belong, so I can see how far a woman's impactful voice can reach. Help me build this community so we can bring more truthful stories for you. I looked at Brandon, seeing him clearly for the first time. He was as guilty as Natalie, maybe more so. He'd probably been the one who suggested this whole scheme. Before I answer that, I need to know something. Brandon, did you create the false documents Natalie showed me? He looked at Richard Thornton, who shook his head. Don't answer that. The silence was answer enough. James gathered his papers. Mrs. Morrison has decided to press charges. Natalie Sullivan Hayes and Brandon Hayes, you'll be hearing from both the police and the district attorney's office. Mr. Thornton, I suggest you recuse yourself from this case immediately, as you may be called as a witness to fraud. Natalie's composure finally shattered completely. Mom, you're really going to do this? You're going to send your own daughter to jail? You threw me away like garbage, Natalie. You called me stupid and useless. You tried to steal everything your father left me, and you didn't feel a moment of guilt about any of it. I'm sorry. No, you're sorry you got caught. There's a difference. As they left, Natalie turned back one more time. You're going to regret this, Mother. I promise you that. The threat hung in the air after they were gone. James put a reassuring hand on my shoulder. Catherine, you did the right thing. But I need to warn you. Natalie and Brandon aren't going to accept this quietly. They're going to fight back, and it could get ugly. I know, but I'm done being the woman who accepts whatever scraps she's given. I'm done being invisible. After James left, I called Agent Diana Foster. She arrived an hour later with another agent, a stern-looking man she introduced as Agent Marcus Webb. Morrison, Diana said, settling into Thomas's study. We need to discuss your husband's activities and what they mean for your current situation. I showed them Thomas's journal, and Diana nodded as she flipped through pages. This matches what Thomas told us. He was incredibly detailed in documenting everything. Agent Webb spoke up. Mrs. Morrison, your husband's cooperation led to investigations into some very dangerous people. When these cases go public next week, there could be repercussions. People who lost money or went to prison because of Thomas's testimony may look for someone to blame. Are you saying I'm in danger? We're saying you should be careful. But there's something else. The money Thomas left you, it's complicated. My stomach dropped. Is it illegal? No, Diana said quickly. Thomas earned it through legal means, and his cooperation with us cleared any questionable activities.
But some of his former clients may try to claim that money belongs to them.
We're going to need your cooperation to prevent that. What kind of cooperation? We need you to testify about Thomas's state of mind, his intentions, his fear of what these people might do. And we need you to be willing to freeze certain assets until the investigations are complete. How long will that take? 6 months, maybe a year. In the meantime, you'll have access to enough money to live comfortably, but the bulk of the estate will be in a federal hold. And what about Natalie? Does she know about Thomas's FBI cooperation? Diana shook her head. I don't think so. If she did, she would have tried to use it as leverage already. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Thomas, about the double life he'd lived, about all the secrets he'd kept. Had our entire marriage been a lie, or had he been trying to protect me from a world I couldn't understand? I got up and made tea, sitting in the dark kitchen, when my phone rang. Unknown number. Hello? Catherine Morrison? The voice was male, rough, with an accent I couldn't place. You need to stop cooperating with the FBI. Who is this? Someone who knows what your husband did. Someone who lost everything because of his lies. You drop the federal case, or you'll regret it. The line went dead. I sat there shaking, the phone still in my hand, when it rang again. This time it was Diana. Catherine, I need you to pack a bag. We're moving you to a safe house tonight. What's happening? We've intercepted communications suggesting that associates of one of Thomas's former clients are planning to make contact with you. We need to keep you safe until the trials are over. The threat on the phone, that was real? Very real. Agents will be there in 20 minutes. As I threw clothes into a suitcase for the second time in a month, I realized my life had become something I never could have imagined. I wasn't just fighting my daughter for my inheritance anymore. I was caught in the middle of federal investigations, criminal enterprises, and dangerous people who wanted revenge for what Thomas had done. But I wasn't going to run. I wasn't going to hide, and I wasn't going to let anyone, not Natalie, not criminals, not anyone, take away what was rightfully mine. The safe house was a nondescript apartment in a suburb 40 minutes from Riverside. Agent Webb and another agent, a woman named Lisa Chen, stayed with me around the clock. For 2 weeks, I lived in a strange limbo, cut off from my home, my life, everything familiar. The trials were moving forward. 7 of Thomas's former clients had been indicted on money laundering charges. 2 had already taken plea deals. And Natalie had hired an aggressive defense attorney who was making noise about my mental competency. She's claiming you're suffering from grief-induced delusions, Diana explained. Her lawyer is arguing that you've been manipulated by federal agents and attorneys who want to access Thomas's money. That's insane. It's also effective. If she can convince a judge that you're not mentally capable of managing your affairs, she could potentially get a conservatorship and control everything. Can she do that? She can try, which is why we need you to be ready to testify, not just about the will, but about Thomas's activities, your marriage, everything. You need to show the court that you're completely capable of understanding what's happening. I spent the next week preparing for depositions and court appearances with James Hartwell. He coached me on how to answer questions, how to stay calm under pressure, how to present myself as competent and credible. Catherine, he said during one session, they're going to try to paint you as a naive housewife who never understood anything about your own life. Don't let them. You're intelligent, capable, and fully aware of what's happening. Own that. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for a Friday morning in early December. I dressed carefully in a dark gray suit, minimal jewelry, my hair pulled back in a neat bun. I looked like what I was, a woman who meant business. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. Natalie sat at the defense table with her attorney, a sharp-faced woman named Patricia Hendricks. Brandon sat behind her in the gallery, looking pale and worried. When Natalie saw me, our eyes met across the room. For just a moment I saw something flicker in her expression. Was it regret, sadness, or just anger at being caught? The judge, an older woman named Margaret Thornton, reviewed the documents before calling the hearing to order. This is a preliminary hearing to determine the validity of two conflicting wills and to address allegations of elder fraud. Ms. Hendricks, you're representing Natalie Hayes? Yes, Your Honor, and we're filing a motion to declare Catherine Morrison mentally incompetent to manage her affairs and requesting an emergency conservatorship. James stood immediately. Your Honor, that motion is baseless and offensive. Morrison is a sharp, capable woman who has been victimized by her daughter's fraud. This is a transparent attempt to continue that fraud through legal manipulation. Judge Thornton looked at me. Mrs. Morrison, are you comfortable speaking for yourself? Yes, Your Honor. Then let's hear your side of this story. I stood, my hands trembling slightly, but my voice steady. I told the judge everything. About Thomas's death, Natalie's visits, the pressure to move out, the revelation about the two wills. I told her about Thomas's letter, his journal, his FBI cooperation. And I told her about Natalie's words. Find somewhere to die. You're useless now. The courtroom was silent when I finished. Judge Thornton looked at Natalie.
Hayes, did you tell your mother to find somewhere to die?
Natalie's lawyer whispered something to her, but Natalie shook her head. Your Honor, I was under enormous stress. My father had just died. I may have said things in anger that I didn't mean. But you did say them? Natalie hesitated. I don't remember exactly what I said. I have a recording, I said quietly. Thomas installed security cameras in the house years ago. They record audio. I've provided the footage to Mr. Hartwell. James handed a flash drive to the bailiff. Your Honor, this contains security footage from the day Natalie told her mother to leave the house. The audio is very clear. We watched the footage on a screen in the courtroom. Natalie's voice was unmistakable. Find somewhere else to die. You're useless now. The judge's expression hardened. Miss Hayes, that statement alone demonstrates elder abuse. Combined with the evidence of will fraud, I'm denying your motion for conservatorship. In fact, I'm granting a temporary restraining order, preventing you from contacting your mother or accessing any of Thomas Morrison's estate until this matter is fully investigated. Natalie stood up. Your Honor, this is ridiculous. That money is rightfully mine. Sit down, Miss Hayes. The judge's voice was ice. Based on the evidence presented, I'm referring this case to the district attorney for criminal prosecution. You and your husband will answer charges of fraud, forgery, and elder abuse. This hearing is adjourned. As the bailiff called the next case, Natalie turned to look at me. Her expression was pure hatred. Outside the courtroom, James squeezed my shoulder. Catherine, you were perfect. Absolutely perfect. But it's not over, is it? No. The criminal trial will take months, and the federal cases are still pending. But you won today. That's what matters. That night, Agent Diana Foster called me back to the safe house. Catherine, we have a problem. Another threat? Worse. Brandon Hayes has disappeared. He missed his check-in with his bail supervisor. We think he's running. Running where? We don't know. But he took a significant amount of cash from a hidden account before he left. We're talking about $500,000. Is Natalie with him? No, she's still in Riverside. But she's lawyered up completely now. Won't talk to anyone without Patricia Hendricks present. What does this mean for me? It means Brandon is desperate, and desperate people do dangerous things. We're going to need to keep you in protection longer than we thought. I sat in the safe house that night, thinking about how my life had become unrecognizable. 3 months ago, I'd been a grieving widow. Now I was a federal witness, a target for criminals, and a woman watching her own daughter face felony charges. But I wasn't sorry, not for a moment. Brandon Hayes was found 3 weeks later in Mexico, trying to board a flight to Panama. He'd been living in a beachside hotel under a fake name, spending the money he'd hidden from federal investigators. The U.S. Marshals brought him back in handcuffs, and his bail was revoked immediately. With Brandon in federal custody, the full extent of their scheme began to unravel. It turned out that Brandon hadn't just helped Natalie forge documents about Thomas's will. He'd been running his own scam for years, defrauding investors through his real estate development company. The FBI found evidence of a Ponzi scheme that had cost elderly investors over $15 million. Catherine, Diana told me during one of her visits, Brandon was using Natalie's inheritance to cover his illegal activities. He needed that money desperately, and when he realized it wasn't coming, he panicked. Did Natalie know about his fraud? We're not sure yet. She claims complete ignorance, but her financial records show some suspicious transfers. The investigation is ongoing. Meanwhile, Thomas's federal case is concluded. 7 men were convicted of money laundering and tax evasion, sentenced to prison terms ranging from 5 to 15 years. The money they'd tried to hide was seized by the government, and Thomas's role as an informant became public record. The media attention was intense. Local news stations picked up the story. Widow uncovers husband's secret life as FBI informant while fighting daughter's inheritance fraud. Reporters camped outside my house. My phone rang constantly with interview requests. I said no to all of them, except one. A journalist named Rebecca Park from a national news magazine contacted me with a different kind of proposition.
Morrison, she said over coffee in a quiet cafe where I'd finally been allowed to go with agent supervision, I want to write about elder financial abuse.
Your story isn't just about your family. It's about an epidemic of adult children defrauding their aging parents. I want to expose that. Why me? I asked. There must be thousands of cases like mine. Because you fought back. Most victims are too ashamed or too frightened to speak up. You refuse to be silent. That's a story that needs to be told. I thought about all the times I'd stayed quiet in my marriage, in my relationship with Natalie, in my entire life, always keeping the peace, never making waves, accepting whatever role I was given. Okay, I said, let's tell the story. The article Rebecca wrote was published 3 months later in a major news magazine. It detailed Thomas's double life, Natalie's fraud, Brandon's Ponzi scheme, and my fight to reclaim my life. The response was overwhelming. I received hundreds of letters from other seniors who'd experienced similar abuse from family members. Some shared stories even worse than mine. I called James Hartwell. James, I want to start a foundation. Something that helps seniors who've been financially abused by family members. Legal aid, counseling, emergency housing, whatever they need. Catherine, that's a wonderful idea, but it will require significant funding. I have $28 million. I think I can spare some of it for a good cause. The Catherine Morrison Foundation for Elder Protection launched 6 months after Thomas's death. We provided free legal services to seniors fighting inheritance fraud, offered financial literacy classes, created emergency shelter for those who'd been displaced by family members, and lobbied for stronger laws protecting elderly victims. The work gave me purpose beyond my own pain. Every person we helped felt like a small redemption, not just for me, but for Thomas too. His tainted money was being used to protect vulnerable people. His secrets were funding transparency. His lies were building truth. Natalie's trial began in September, nearly a year after Thomas's death. She faced 5 felony counts: fraud, forgery, elder abuse, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice. Brandon, facing his own trial for securities fraud, had already taken a plea deal that included testifying against her. I sat in the courtroom every day, watching my daughter's defense crumble under the weight of evidence. Security footage, forged documents, bank records, witness testimony, it was overwhelming. Brandon's testimony was devastating. He described in detail how Natalie had planned the scheme months before Thomas died, how she'd researched forging wills, how she'd coached him on creating convincing documents. She kept saying it was our money anyway, Brandon testified. That Catherine didn't deserve it because she'd never worked for it. That her mother was too stupid to know the difference. Those words, my own daughter's words repeated in a courtroom, should have hurt, but they didn't. I'd moved past hurt into something clearer and colder. The jury deliberated for 3 days. When they returned, I held my breath as the 4 women stood to read the verdict. On the count of fraud in the first degree, we find the defendant guilty. Guilty on all counts. Natalie's face remained blank as the verdicts were read, but her hands trembled in her lap. When the judge asked if she had anything to say before sentencing, she finally looked at me. "Mom," she said, her voice breaking, "I'm sorry. I know you probably don't believe me, but I am sorry. I lost myself somewhere along the way. I became someone I don't recognize, someone Dad would have been ashamed of." Judge Thornton sentenced her to 4 years in federal prison, followed by 5 years of probation. Brandon received 7 years for his Ponzi scheme and his role in the inheritance fraud. As they led Natalie away in handcuffs, she looked back at me one last time. I didn't smile. I didn't cry. I just watched my daughter disappear through a door that would keep her away for years. Outside the courthouse, Rebecca Park was waiting with her camera crew. "Mrs. Morrison, how do you feel about the verdict?" "I feel like justice was served, but I also feel sad that it came to this. Natalie was my daughter long before she became a criminal. I'll always grieve the relationship we could have had." "Do you think you'll reconcile with her after she serves her time?" "I don't know. That depends on whether she uses this time to genuinely change or just to plan her next move. I'm not the same woman I was a year ago. I won't accept empty apologies or surface-level remorse. If Natalie wants a relationship with me, she'll have to earn it." That night, alone in my house for the first time in months, I walked through rooms that finally felt like mine. I'd redecorated Thomas's study into a library. The living room had new furniture I chose myself. The kitchen had been renovated with colors I loved. Every space reflected who I was becoming, rather than who I'd been. I poured a glass of wine and stood on the back deck, looking at the garden Thomas had loved. I'd hired a new landscaper who was teaching me about plants, showing me how to care for growing things. My hands, soft and useless according to Natalie, were learning to work soil and prune roses. My phone buzzed with a text from Diana Foster. "Congratulations on the verdict. You earned this. By the way, Thomas would be proud of who you've become." I smiled, thinking about my complicated husband with his secrets and his protections. Would he be proud? Maybe. But more importantly, I was proud of myself. The foundation was thriving. We'd helped over 300 seniors in our first year, recovering millions in stolen assets, providing housing for displaced elderly, offering legal representation to those who couldn't afford it. I'd hired a full staff and was learning to run a nonprofit organization. Me, the woman who'd supposedly never understood money or business. I'd also gone back to school. At 67 years old, I enrolled in community college classes in business management and nonprofit administration. My classmates were mostly in their 20s, but they treated me with respect when they realized I wasn't just auditing for fun. I was building a new career. The irony wasn't lost on me. Natalie had called me useless, irrelevant, past my prime. Now I was running a successful foundation, managing millions of dollars, making decisions that affected hundreds of lives. I'd become everything she'd claimed I could never be. 3 months after the sentencing, I received a letter from Natalie. The prison chaplain had encouraged her to write, she said. She wanted to apologize properly, to explain her actions, to ask for forgiveness. I read the letter 3 times, looking for sincerity beyond the careful words. Some of it felt genuine. Natalie wrote about therapy sessions where she was confronting her sense of entitlement, her relationship with money, her treatment of me over the years. But there were also deflections, subtle blame shifting, suggestions that Thomas's secrecy had somehow justified her actions. I put the letter in a drawer and didn't respond. Not yet, maybe not ever. Forgiveness, I'd learned, wasn't something anyone was entitled to. It was a gift, and gifts had to be earned. If you feel my words, show your support by liking the video and subscribing to the channel. And tell me from which city you belong, so I can see how far a woman's impactful voice can reach. Help me build this community so we can bring more truthful stories for you. The grandchildren, Natalie's 2 kids who are now teenagers, started reaching out. They'd been kept away from the trial, told a sanitized version of events by Brandon's mother, who'd taken custody. But they were smart kids, and they'd found news articles, read about their mother's crimes, learned what she'd done to me. Grandma Catherine, my grandson Marcus wrote, "I don't understand why Mom did what she did, but I want you to know that I don't agree with it. I know Grandpa Thomas left you that money for a reason, and I'm glad you fought back." His words touched me more than I expected. These children had lost both parents to prison, been torn from their lives, forced to live with relatives. They were victims too, in their own way. We spent a weekend together, awkward at first, but gradually warming. I told them stories about Thomas that weren't about his secrets or his crimes, but about the grandfather who'd loved them. I showed them photos, shared memories, tried to give them pieces of the past that weren't tainted by recent events. "Do you hate Mom?" Marcus asked on their last evening there. "No," I said honestly. "I'm angry. I'm disappointed. I'm sad about what she became. But I don't hate her. She's still your mother, and I hope prison gives her a chance to become someone better." "Will you ever talk to her again?" "Maybe, when she's ready to face what she did without excuses. When she can look at me and see a person she hurt, not an obstacle she failed to remove." A year and a half after Thomas's death, I was invited to testify before a congressional committee studying elder financial abuse. They wanted to hear from survivors, to understand the scope of the problem, to craft better laws protecting vulnerable seniors. I sat at a table in Washington, facing rows of legislators, cameras broadcasting the hearing live, and I told my story. Not just the facts of Natalie's fraud, but the emotional reality of being devalued by your own child, of being told you're useless, of watching someone you raised try to erase you from your own life. Elder abuse isn't just about money, I told them. It's about seeing your adult children look at you and see only an impediment to their inheritance. It's about realizing that the people you sacrificed for value you less than they value your assets. It's about being made invisible in your own life. When I finished, several committee members thanked me. One congresswoman, a woman in her 50s, came up afterward with tears in her eyes. "My mother went through something similar," she said. "She didn't fight back like you did. She just disappeared into a care facility and died 6 months later. Thank you for speaking up." The testimony led to new legislation. The Elder Protection Act passed with bipartisan support, creating federal penalties for inheritance fraud, requiring verification of will authenticity before probate, and establishing funding for legal aid programs like my foundation. I was invited to the White House for the bill signing. As I stood behind the president, watching her sign legislation that would protect countless seniors from what I'd endured, I thought about the woman I'd been 18 months earlier, grieving, lost, ready to accept whatever scraps my daughter offered me. That woman was gone. In her place was someone stronger, angrier, more certain of her own worth. Someone who'd learned that being invisible was a choice, not an inevitable consequence of age or gender or life circumstances. 2 years after Thomas's death, I visited Natalie in prison for the first time. She'd been moved to a medium security facility in Virginia, and she'd completed multiple therapy programs. Her counselor thought a visit might be beneficial. Natalie looked different. Older, thinner, her expensive highlights grown out to reveal gray roots. She wore a prison uniform that erased all traces of her former designer wardrobe. When she saw me enter the visiting room, her eyes filled with tears. "Mom," she whispered, "thank you for coming." We sat across from each other at a metal table, neither sure where to begin. "I've been writing to you," Natalie said. "Did you get my letters?" "Yes," I said. "You never wrote back." She nodded, accepting this. "Mom, I need you to know something. I'm not the same person I was. Prison, therapy, having time to think about what I did, it's changed me." "People say that," I replied. "They say they've changed. But words are easy, Natalie. I need to see evidence of change, not just hear promises of it. I know, and I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I want to earn it, however long that takes." We talked for 2 hours. Natalie described her therapy sessions, her growing understanding of how she devalued me, her recognition of the entitlement that had driven her actions. She talked about reading articles about the foundation, about feeling proud and ashamed in equal measure. Proud that I'd built something meaningful, ashamed that her actions had been the catalyst. "The kids visited last month," she said. "Marcus told me about staying with you. Thank you for not poisoning them against me. They're your children, Natalie. I won't lie to them about what you did, but I won't use them as weapons either. That's not who I am." Near the end of our visit, Natalie asked the question I'd been expecting. "When I get out, will there be room in your life for me?" "I don't know," I said honestly. "That depends on who you are when you get out. The daughter who committed fraud and called me useless has no place in my life. But if you become someone different, Someone genuine and honest and kind. Then maybe we can build something new. It won't be what it was before, she said. No, it can't be, because I'm not who I was before either. On the drive back to Riverside, I thought about forgiveness and redemption. Could people really change? Could relationships be rebuilt after such devastating betrayal? I didn't have answers, but I'd learned that I didn't need answers immediately. I could sit with uncertainty, hold space for possibility without making commitments I wasn't ready for. The foundation continued to grow. We expanded to 3 states, helped over 1,000 seniors, recovered more than $40 million in stolen assets. I hired a former district attorney to run the legal program and a social worker to manage the counseling services. My role shifted from doing everything to leading a team, a challenge that terrified and energized me. I also started dating. Nothing serious, just coffee or dinner with men I met through volunteer work or foundation events. It felt strange at first, disloyal to Thomas, but Diana Foster, who'd become a good friend, reminded me that I was only 68 years old. You have decades left, Catherine. Thomas wouldn't want you to spend them alone. One man, a retired judge named Henry Wallace, became a regular presence in my life. We shared interests in social justice, classical music, and terrible puns. He made me laugh, challenged my thinking, respected my independence. We took things slowly, both of us scarred by previous relationships, both cautious about new commitments. On the 3rd anniversary of Thomas's death, I hosted a gala fundraiser for the foundation. 300 people attended, including legislators, donors, and dozens of seniors we'd helped. I gave a speech about transformation, about refusing to be defined by trauma, about building meaning from pain. 3 years ago, I told the audience, I was a woman who believed her worth came from serving others. I was a wife, a mother, a supporting character in other people's stories. Then, my world collapsed, and I had to rebuild myself from nothing. What I discovered is that I was never nothing. I was just invisible because I'd made myself small enough to fit into the roles others assigned me. The speech got a standing ovation. Afterward, dozens of people shared their own stories. Elderly women who'd fought back against abusive children. Men who discovered late in life that they were more than their careers. People who'd transformed trauma into purpose. This is what Thomas's tainted money had built. Not just a foundation, but a community of survivors who refused to disappear. Late that night, alone in my house, I opened Thomas's journal one more time. I'd read it dozens of times over the past 3 years, but I kept returning to the last entry, written 3 days before his death. Catherine doesn't know how strong she is. I've spent our marriage protecting her, sheltering her, keeping her safe from harsh realities. But what if I've been wrong? What if my protection has prevented her from discovering her own power? I'm changing my will to give her everything, not because she needs to be taken care of, but because she deserves the chance to take care of herself. If something happens to me, I hope she fights. I hope she discovers that she's been a queen all along, just playing the role of a pawn because that's what everyone expected. My darling Catherine, forgive me for not seeing you clearly while I was alive, and forgive me for loving you in ways that made you smaller instead of larger. You are extraordinary. Be extraordinary. I closed the journal, tears streaming down my face. Thomas had seen something in me that I hadn't seen in myself. And Natalie's betrayal, painful as it was, had forced me to discover it. 4 years after Thomas's death, Natalie was released from prison. She'd served her full sentence with good behavior. Her first call after release was to me. Mom, I'm out. I know I have no right to ask, but can we meet? We met at a coffee shop halfway between Riverside and the halfway house where Natalie was living. She looked different again, healthier than in prison, but humbled in a way she'd never been before. She wore simple clothes, no designer labels, no expensive jewelry. We talked for 3 hours. Natalie described her plans to work for a nonprofit helping formerly incarcerated women reintegrate into society. She'd gotten certified as a counselor while in prison, wanted to use her experience to help others. I need to give back, she said. I need to prove that I'm not the person I was. To me? I asked. Or to yourself? Both, but mostly to myself. I have to live with what I did, Mom. Every day I wake up knowing I tried to destroy my own mother for money. That's not something you forgive easily, even when the victim forgives you. I haven't forgiven you, I said gently. Not completely, but I'm working toward it. Natalie nodded, tears in her eyes. That's more than I deserve. We agreed to weekly meetings, to slowly rebuild trust. No expectations, no timelines, just two women trying to find their way back to something resembling a relationship. The foundation celebrated its 5th anniversary with a major event in Washington. We'd helped over 5,000 seniors, recovered more than $300 million, and successfully advocated for elder protection laws in 42 states. I'd written a book about my experience that had become a bestseller, with all proceeds going to the foundation. At the anniversary gala, I looked around at the crowd of supporters, survivors, and advocates. Rebecca Park was there, having written multiple follow-up articles. Diana Foster and her husband attended, having become close friends. Henry Wallace stood beside me, his hand warm in mine. Marcus and his sister were there, both now in college, both volunteers with the foundation. And in the back of the room, quiet and somewhat uncertain, was Natalie. She'd asked permission to attend, wanting to see what had been built from the ashes of her crime. I'd said yes, though I wasn't sure it was the right decision. During my speech, I talked about the journey from victim to survivor to advocate. I didn't mention Natalie by name, but everyone knew the story. It's not enough to survive, I told the audience. We have to transform our survival into meaning. We have to take the worst moments of our lives and build something better from them, not because we owe it to anyone, but because we owe it to ourselves. After the event, Natalie approached me hesitantly. Mom, what you've built here is incredible. Thank you. I'm proud of you. I know I don't have the right to be proud, given what I did, but I am. I looked at my daughter, seeing the complex person she'd become. Still flawed, still working through her mistakes, but genuinely trying to be better. Natalie, I'm not going to pretend that what you did is okay. It's not. It never will be. But I'm also not going to spend the rest of my life punishing you for it. You're building a new life. I've built a new life. Maybe there's room for both of us in this new world. She hugged me then, and I let her. It wasn't the relationship we'd had before. That was gone forever. But it was something. A fragile beginning that might grow into something real. As the guests departed and the staff cleaned up, I stood with Henry on a balcony overlooking the city. 5 years ago, I was sleeping in a budget motel, I said, believing I was worthless. And now I know better. I know that worth isn't determined by age or role or what others think of us. It's determined by what we do when everything is stripped away. And when everything was taken from me, I discovered I was strong enough to build it all back. But better. Henry kissed my forehead. That's my favorite thing about you, Catherine. You're not who you were. You're who you chose to become. That night, I wrote in the journal I'd started keeping after Thomas's death. 5 years of entries, chronicling my transformation from invisible wife to visible force. Dear Thomas, I wrote, I think I finally understand what you were trying to do with that will, with those protections. You were giving me permission to discover myself. You were forcing me to fight when I would have accepted defeat. You weren't just protecting me financially, you were protecting me from remaining small forever. Thank you, and goodbye. I'm not the woman you married anymore. I'm someone new. I hope wherever you are, you're proud of who I've become. I hope you understand that I had to let you go to find myself, your wife, but also more than your wife, Catherine. I closed the journal and looked around my study. The walls were covered with photos from foundation events, certificates of recognition, letters from people we'd helped. This was my legacy now. Not something I'd supported or facilitated for someone else, but something I'd built with my own hands and heart and mind. The woman my daughter had tried to erase had instead become unforgettable. The woman they'd called useless had become essential to thousands of people. The woman they'd told to disappear had instead shown up in the most powerful way possible. And that, I thought, was the best revenge of all. Not destroying my enemies, but becoming so much more than they ever thought I could be. If you feel my words, show your support by liking the video and subscribing to the channel. And tell me from which city you belong, so I can see how far a woman's impactful voice can reach. Help me build this community, so we can bring more truthful stories for you. 10 years after Thomas's death, I stood in front of a classroom of law students, teaching a course on elder law and financial abuse. The foundation had expanded internationally. I'd been invited to speak at the United Nations. My book had been translated into 17 languages, and Natalie, now fully integrated back into society, ran our reintegration program for formerly incarcerated women. Our relationship would never be perfect. There were still moments of tension, old wounds that ached, but we built something honest from the ruins of our previous lies. She was no longer the entitled daughter who'd seen me as an obstacle. I was no longer the diminished mother who accepted whatever treatment came my way. We were two women who'd both been transformed by crisis, finding our way back to each other through hard work and honesty. One student raised her hand.
Professor Morrison, do you regret what happened? If you could go back and prevent your daughter's crime, would you? I thought about this carefully.
10 years ago, the answer would have been yes. But now? No, I said honestly. What happened was terrible. It was painful and traumatic and wrong. But it also freed me. It forced me to discover who I was beyond the roles I'd accepted.
If I could go back and prevent it, I'd spend the rest of my life being invisible.
Sometimes the worst things that happen to us are also the things that save us. The students nodded, taking notes, not quite understanding yet. But they would, I thought. Life had a way of teaching lessons that textbooks couldn't. That evening, I had dinner with Henry. We'd been together for 8 years now, comfortable and committed, without needing marriage certificates or legal entanglements. We liked our independence, our separate homes, our chosen intimacy rather than obligatory proximity. Catherine, he said over dessert, I'd been thinking about our legacy. What happens to the foundation when we're gone? I'd thought about this too. The foundation now had an endowment of over $50 million, a permanent staff of 30, and programs in 6 countries. I wanted to continue independently, I said, not tied to my name or my story, but to the mission, protecting vulnerable people from those who should protect them. We spent the evening planning, discussing, building structures that would outlast us. This, I thought, was true immortality, not in being remembered, but in creating something that continued to matter after you were gone. Late that night, I received a call from Marcus. Grandma, he said, his voice excited, I got into law school, and I want to specialize in elder law. Because of what you built, because of what you showed me about fighting back. My heart swelled with pride. That's wonderful, Marcus. You're going to be extraordinary. I learned from the best, he said. After we hung up, I sat in the darkness of my living room, surrounded by the life I'd built from nothing. From that terrible moment when Natalie had told me to find somewhere to die, I'd found somewhere to live. Really live, not just exist in the margins of other people's stories. I thought about all the women I'd helped over the years, the 80-year-old whose son had stolen her pension, the 75-year-old whose daughter had forged power of attorney documents, the 69-year-old whose entire family had conspired to declare her incompetent so they could access her inheritance. Each one had that same moment I'd had, sitting in that budget motel room, realizing they'd been discarded by people who claimed to love them, and each one had fought back, reclaimed their lives, discovered their power. Not just a foundation, but a movement of women refusing to disappear when it became convenient for others. My phone buzzed with a message from Natalie. Mom, I'm leading a workshop tomorrow for women leaving prison, teaching them about financial literacy and protecting themselves from family exploitation. Wish me luck? I smiled and typed back. You don't need luck. You need courage. And I know you have that. Proud of you. It was true. Despite everything, despite the years of pain and betrayal, I was proud of what Natalie had become, not because she'd been punished, but because she'd genuinely transformed. She'd taken her worst actions and built a life of amends from them. We'd both been transformed by the same crisis, just in different ways. As I prepared for bed, I caught my reflection in the mirror. The woman looking back was 78 years old, her hair silver, her face lined with decades of living. But her eyes were bright and sharp and knowing. She looked like someone who'd lived fully, loved deeply, suffered terribly, and emerged stronger. She looked like someone who knew her worth. Tomorrow I'd wake up and continue the work. More seniors to help, more stories to hear, more lives to touch. The work was never finished, but that was okay. I wasn't looking for an ending anymore. I was building a legacy that would continue long after I was gone. And somewhere, I like to think, Thomas was watching. The complicated man who'd loved me imperfectly, but had given me the ultimate gift, the chance to discover who I really was. Thank you, Thomas, I whispered to the darkness. Thank you for the protection. Thank you for seeing in me what I couldn't see in myself. And thank you, Natalie, I added, surprising myself. Thank you for breaking me open, because what came out was stronger than either of us ever imagined. I turned off the lights and climbed into bed, comfortable in the house that was truly mine, the life that was authentically mine, the identity I'd fought so hard to claim. The woman they'd tried to erase had instead become indelible. And that was the greatest victory of all.